Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? There's a book called The School of Life, and in that book, I think near the beginning, talks about this idea that there are two really flawed assumptions baked into our education system. And in my experience, these are kind of baked into life in general, and they show up everywhere in terms of how we teach and how we learn, because a lot of times we constantly do both. And these two flawed assumptions are, first, that what is being taught is more important than how it's taught, or that how it's taught really doesn't matter that much at all. And the second one is this idea that we just need to be taught or learn something once, and then we can move on to the next thing, and we've retained that information. And so we have that as a foundation. So I want to give you examples from my own life where I have my own experience of why this is wrong and flawed, and why we should approach things differently. The first one, like when I was a kid, I was excited about all things scientific, very interested in stuff, and I was extremely excited to take chemistry in high school. I loved that stuff. My dad instilled in me a love of chemistry, and we used to do little experiments and all that kind of stuff. So I was really pumped. And the very first day of chemistry, the teacher poured some sulfuric acid on some sugar, and the usual happened, and I knew what happened, could explain it, and all that kind of stuff. I was really pumped for this class. I probably said too much. Anyhow, the teacher was terrible. I got a D, I believe, in chemistry. And she was somebody that probably would have been very successful and really done well as a research chemist in a lab somewhere doing the thing, but she had the personality of a table, and she could not, for the life of her, make the subject engaging and interesting. Not only that, but the focus of the class tended to be a lot on the qualitative, or the quantitative rather, part of chemistry, the numbers. And rather than the qualitative, rather than the what is stuff, what is it doing, all that kind of thing. And she just couldn't bring the two together. So there was a lot of rote memorization of numbers and formulas without really, talking about why these were important, what was actually happening. And it just became dry and boring and tedious, and just an exercise in using a calculator in the class. There was this other teacher, apparently, who was revered in the school and said things like, "The mole is the key," and he got kids that were not interested in science whatsoever really excited about learning chemistry. And I wish I had them, but I didn't. Afterwards, I self-educated on chemistry and, was able to read all kinds of things, by Asimov, by some other people, I forget, who wrote a book where they talked about this idea that why trans fats are bad is because of quantum mechanics, and explain the energy of the orbitals and all this kind of stuff. Really great stuff. I even self-taught some organic chemistry. I even found some of these textbooks for colleges and high school, more inspiring than that teacher. So how things are taught really, really matters. And this shows up everywhere. I think of even say something like how RPG books are written or other instructional books are written. How the information gets given to you, it matters intensely. I talked about this a lot. The old 1981 basic version of D&D, where there were terms that were in bold, and there were never any synonyms used for those terms. They were always in bold, and these stuck out to you. And so it was taught in a way that really stuck with you. There's also one of my favorite bass guitar channels in terms of lessons is called the Brownstone. This guy, Ray Brown, who's a professional player, and he has this marvelous way of breaking down, the simple to the complex and showing you how to play, which is great. So I recommend that channel for any aspiring bass player, or even intermediate, or even advanced, because he's got some great exercises in there which have challenged how I think about things. Anyhow, let's go on to the next one, which is once you learn something, you don't need to learn it again. This is insane. There was this guy, Lee Lowry, that runs a course called PMT, Physical and Psychological Management Techniques. And it got so big that he had to start to train trainers that work for agencies like mine to, and we'd license us to teach his course. And he was an excellent trainer, but he also taught us how to be excellent trainers, and gave us, these ideas like the, average person needs things repeated 7 times before they, take it in. So when you repeat things 7 times to somebody, and, and they've heard it 7 times, at that point, once they've learned, or you've said something 7 times to them, and he was saying these things to us 7 times. You get the idea. But he would constantly, repeat the information in new and different and novel ways. And people need to be retrained on this all the time, because it was something that you would forget. In, so many areas, like in sports, people drill the fundamentals all the time. With bass guitar, with a lot of my purposeful practice, it's re-drilling the fundamentals and learning that one more time, or getting that more into my muscle memory. And there's so many other areas of life in recovery. And in a lot of areas where it's self-improvement or self-help or whatever, it's said that if you're in recovery, you're going to learn everything you ever need to know within the first 90 days. And that, I believe that's true, probably earlier than that. However, why do we keep going to meetings? Why do we keep on talking to other people in recovery? Because we forget these things in the moment. And very often I go to a meeting and I hear somebody say something that I know. I've known this for years, but I have just kind of forgotten it. I just needed to be re-drilled. And sometimes the best advice I ever hear comes out of my own mouth as I'm talking to somebody. It's obvious what's going on with them. And I say it and I say, oh, you know what, Ivan? You haven't really been doing that yourself. So we constantly need to be re-drilled, re-educated in these really simple, fundamental things. It's not something where it's like one and done. Far from it. And even if you look at, there's channels now that I'm watching about how to build a YouTube channel or how to grow things, and it's always the same fundamentals over and over again. And the people saying, well, I need to hear this as well because it's very easy to forget. And it doesn't matter what the pursuit is. You'll hear that constantly. So in life, not just in our flawed educational system, but as we are learning and teaching, because I believe we all do that more than we know. How we teach things, how we learn things is sometimes far more important than the material itself. And this material needs repetition. We need to hear it and relearn it in different contexts over and over and over again for us to incorporate it and make it something that's going to stick. And we're able to synthesize other things on top of that. And then sometimes we need to relearn it again. And this boils back down to how it's being taught. You see how it all works together? So I think these are two things that, observations I thought were brilliant. And they're things that apply to so much more than just when we were in high school. You know what I mean?